Chinese government has announced that doing any transactions in cryptocurrency is now illegal. Holding it, apparently you can still hold it, and this comes after Bitcoin servers being kicked out of the country. So yes, they've pushed the button. Go ahead, Balaji.
To Friedberg, I would say BitTorrent is what kept the record industry honest. And that kind of forced them to the table of iTunes. So to Chamath's point also, I wouldn't call it more evil, I'd call it more good. And BitTorrent also lurks out there as kind of this, peer-to-peer enforcer that it's a check. Exactly. And it's not gone. And in fact, it's a basis for new technologies. And I think this is another flare-up. The other thing is that with crypto, the upside, even though the state wants to crack down on it harder, the upside is also greater and the global internet is bigger. And so I think the rest of world, meaning all the world besides the US and China, is a huge player in what is to come. That's India, but it's also Brazil. It's every other country that's not the US or China. And so that's a new player on the stage. And then third, yes, China banned crypto. Can the US do it? Well, what's interesting is people talk about China copying the US. Nowadays, actually, in many ways, especially on a policy front, the US is copying China without admitting it, but it does so poorly. For example. The lockdown. Okay. The Chinese lockdown, was something where it wasn't just sit in your rooms. It was something with like drones with thermometers and central quarantine where people were taken from their families and centrally quarantined, and 1,000 ultra intrusive measures that the population by and large complied with. The thing is that for the US to follow that, it's a little bit like, as a mental image, imagine a lithe Chinese gymnast going and doing this whole gymnastics routine and then a big, lumpy American following and not being able to do those same moves, right? The Chinese government, is, as I said, lawful evil, but they are set up to just snap this, snap that, do this, do that. The U.S. government is absolutely not, and the U.S. people are not. Whatever you do, also 50%
our system is a democracy, is it not? Like, so you cannot just do that. Even if the government wanted to weld people into their homes, we have a democratic state here where we have to discuss these things, and there's a legal framework to it. So
yes,
it's not
even
possible.
in the 1950s, the 1940s, 1930s, the U.S. was still a democracy, but it basically managed to exert a very strong top-down control on things. Today, we have something for a variety, under FDR or in the 50s, a very conformist society, which was able to kind of drive things through. Even though it's a democracy, it was something where mass media was so centralized that a relatively small group of people could get consensus among themselves. And then what they print in the headlines, who's going to go and figure out the facts on their own? This gets into the media topic later. So it's de facto centralized at the media level, the information production and dissemination level. And then you kind of manufactured consent from there. Today, you're combining that democratic aspect, the legal aspect, with a new information dissemination thing, which has destabilized, I think, a lot of things.
I think we've really gotten China right here. I think that if you look at what's happening, I think we've basically forecasted this orchestration of essentially the vertical integration of China. We have China Inc., where the CEO is Xi Jinping. It's almost like they've changed the game, where what they are playing essentially is like Settlers of Catan or something, where the goal is just to hoard resources. And I think that they have enough critical resources for the world. And the clever part of what they did was the last 20 or 30 years, they leveraged the world to essentially finance their ability to then have a stranglehold on these critical resources, whether it's chips or whether it's rare earths or other materials.
They leveled up.
And I think that was the genius.
Yeah, well, they leveled up.
They leveled up on our capital.
Yes.
And now that all that infrastructure is there, and now that we are addicted to the drug, they can then change the rules of the game.
They leveled up with our operating system. It was a brilliant move, but
they allowed entrepreneurs to believe that they could be entrepreneurs. They allowed an entire society to basically level up economically.
Why did nobody see this coming, Chamath? Nobody saw this coming. People were starting venture firms.
Look what they were doing.
People were taking companies public.
They did Belt and Road while we did nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? What is Belt and Road? Belt and Road is they're creating ports and superhighways to extract the resources that Chamath is talking about and bringing them into the Chinese system. And what did we spend our trillions on nation building in Afghanistan?
Yeah, but why didn't we see this coming? Everybody was looking at China, starting venture firms there, embracing it, taking companies public. Wall Street, politicians, nobody saw this coming.
We saw it. The rising tiger story has been around since the late 90s, right?
I'm talking about why didn't we see them cutting the heads off their
entrepreneurship? Because it was not about white people. China was in Sri Lanka. China was in Africa. These are not sexy, interesting places to white Western audiences. And so that's why it didn't matter, because we all thought that these are countries that are sort of, squalid, third world, developing nation states that don't really matter. They don't necessarily have the resources that matter. But what did China do? They realized that those folks are the future GDP. Those folks are the future population pools, the young that can actually do the hard work. And then they went and they secured again.
So not only did they
resources. Now, so that's one thing. Hold on. So that's one thing. I think we entirely missed it because, as David said, the military industrial complex doesn't look at a developing nation and say, we want to be there. It looks at Afghanistan and says, we want to dominate it because we can actually feed off of that domination. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I think that we misunderstood Xi Jinping's ambition. And I think that that's a reasonable mistake to have made. The first one is an error of just complete stupidity. The second one is something that I think it was legitimate to have missed.
And to your point, Chamath, they not only stole the entrepreneurial playbook, but the colonizing other places and giving them debt and giving them resources and building ports in other countries.
We all thought it was dumb. Let's all be honest. 10 years ago.
We did it.
And
the UK did previously.
I would argue in a lot of cases we benefited. So China set up and bought like the largest pork production company in Australia. And what do you feed those pigs? You feed them soybeans. And where do those soybeans come from? Largest soybean exporting market is the United States. We had a tremendous customer in China as they expanded their consumption pattern through all of this investing they were doing worldwide. We were exporting John Deere farm equipment and Caterpillar construction equipment and soybean products, and there was and our knowledge industry, and there was a tremendous service model, and globalization really created, call it a catch-22 for the United States, where, we were watching the rising tiger, and it fueled in part by this kind of distributed entrepreneurism. But as that distributed entrepreneurism creates, obviously the social...
Do you think there was an equal amount of dollars that went into Western developed nations from China as it went into third world countries?
No, but it's hard
most Western nations couldn't give a shit about.
Yeah, but that money is too hard to turn down.
There's a mistake in our thinking with respect to the rest of the world that we make over and over again. And it was all kind of predicted by a historian named Samuel Huntington at Harvard in the 1990s. He wrote a book called Clash of Civilizations. This book was written at the same time that another famous book came out called The End of History and the Last Man. And what the common belief was in the 1990s in the US was that we had reached an end of history where every country would become democratic and capitalist. Right? That was the end of history, is democratic capitalism. And we believed that the more we went all over the world spreading our ideals, it would hasten this day where they'd all become democratic capitalists. What Huntington said is no. Cultures and civilizations, these go back thousands of years. These are stubborn things. And what these other cultures really want is not westernization, but modernization. And what they're going to do is they're going to modernize. They're going to learn from us as much as they can about technology. They're going to assimilate and adapt and take all of our technology, but they are not going to become like us. They're not going to westernize. And that is basically what's happened over the last 25 years. And so the Chinese have caught up to us, and suddenly we realize, whoa, wait a second. They have not westernized. They are still their own unique civilization.
Correct.
They have basically the equivalent of a modern day emperor, and they have no interest in westernizing. And we're like, what have we done? Because now we've allowed them to catch up from a technological standpoint.